I want to give some props to the last panel, by the way. We have, I think 20% of our developers now are bootcamp grads at Avvo. And so definitely I agree with what a lot of what was said there. And it's been amazing to see how much professional maturity these folks bring to their jobs, coming in as kind of novice or journeyman developers, journey person developers, but very professionally mature, which has been pretty cool. So this talk is building a culture of continuous improvement, agility, and autonomy in your company. That's a fairly wordy, very businessy title. And honestly, it's kind of redundant as well, because I could have just called this building a culture of continuous improvement in your company, because if you've got continuous improvement, you have agility and autonomy. And I'll go into that in this talk. But the lessons that I'm going to share, the things that I'm going to share, are also applicable even within your teams. And I'll try and relate things back to that as I talk. And, well, Nail left, but because he gets to show pictures of his kids. This is my daughter. I don't have any pictures on my laptop of her as a baby, so this is her at age 7. So if we assume, I'm going to assume for the moment, that you like the idea of agility, autonomy, and continuous improvement in your company, right? These are good words. Nobody wants continuous failure, continuous things getting worse in their company. So what does that actually look like? It's easy words to say, but what does it look like? In a culture where you have these things, a continuous improvement, you have no status quo. You have no, that's how we do that here. It's a culture where people are always asking, this thing that we do, can we do this better? It's a deliberate culture. It's a culture where you choose to do things or choose not to do things versus just kind of them happening. And it's a people first kind of culture, right? The people and the way they work is more important than just the processes that are there to help them or to force them into paths. In a culture of continuous improvement, it's a place where people can change, partially because they're enabled, they're empowered to make the change themselves. So they become advocates for the improvement, but they also become stewards of the company's mission or stewards of your team's mission because they can change it and they can make it happen. They feel responsible. It's not something that's done to them. So the question then is, how do you get there, right? You have this or you don't. Most folks don't, so I'm going to assume you don't. And we didn't have this at Avvo either. So I'm going to tell you about how we did it at Avvo, because I'm not a consultant. I'm a CTO. I don't go from company to company kind of sprinkling continuous improvement dust on them and then take a big paycheck and move on to the next company. And I'm not selling a book or anything. I'm going to tell you what we've been doing. As you said in the intro, I came from Spotify. Spotify is a company, this is where I learned this truly. Spotify is a company where continuous improvement is the culture. It's always asking, how do we do things better? All the good things that people associate with how Spotify builds products, at its core, is all about continuous improvement and constantly questioning how we did things. So once you've lived in that environment, like if you've ever worked in a really, really high-performing agile team, you never want to not do that again. Like that's the way you want to work now. And you'll go to places that have that over places that don't. For me, having lived in that culture for a few years, there's no way I wasn't going to bring that to wherever I went. And if it wasn't there, I was going to help make it. So that's what we've been doing at Avvo. Now, a little bit about how we went about it, and also about how I think about leadership and how I do leadership. I think of myself as a gardener, right? I'm not doing things to people. I'm creating conditions where good things naturally happen. Sometimes the things I want, sometimes not necessarily the things I would have planned, but good things nonetheless. So in order to create a garden, you have to find a patch of earth, you need to level it, you need to amend the soil, you need to water and dig furrows and plant seeds and nurture those seeds. And in the end, you get a really nice garden, and the garden's the outcome. And you didn't make the garden, you made the garden happen. And that's what I try and think about. So if we think about building this culture of continuous improvement, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set the conditions so that this naturally happens. And when you do things that way, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but in the end, it's the thing that people chose. It's not the thing you put upon people. It's not the thing you forced on them. It's the thing that they created, so they're more loyal to it, and it tends to survive even if you're not there, which is a true test of leadership. So, to build our continuous improvement garden, there's a few things we need, right? We talk about leveling the soil, removing the rocks, all those kind of things. One of those things is transparency with clarity. A lot of companies believe, and Avvo as well, that we have this transparency culture. It's one of our values, and it's a true value at Avvo. But like many companies that grew very quickly, which Avvo did, like tripling in size over 2 years at one point, that clarity gets lost because you're used to communication just happening. If you go back to the earlier talk about all those connections, when you go from 10 people in a room to like 400 over 7 floors of a building, like all that communication flow gets lost. And if that happens really quickly, nobody adjusts to it. And we had that problem. We had a lot of transparency. Everybody knew what was going on, but nobody knew why. We lost the why a lot. You need that for continuous improvement because people have to understand what's going on if they're going to make good decisions about it. Objective measurement. I think it's hard. There's a saying, you can't improve what you can't measure. I like objective measurements. It helps teams know that they're doing well versus, well, this person thinks it's going great and this person doesn't. So I always like having real objective measurement. Autonomy, going back to the original title of the talk. If you're not able to make decisions and you're not able to put those decisions into action, you're not going to be able to improve anything. It's by definition. And ownership of organizational change. This is an interesting, and this has been a challenge for us even at Avvo. And by the way, I'm going to talk about the things that we've done, and I'm going to tell you all the things we did wrong, because I don't like talks that don't tell you about the mistakes that are made along the way. But this has actually been a challenge for us at Avvo, which is giving the organization, giving the people in my team the ability to change how the team works, not just how their team works, but how all of technology works. And in fact, letting them drive some of that versus me, which would normally run that, has been a little bit controversial because people are like, why are we doing this instead of you, Kevin? But it's important because I want them to feel like this is their organization, not my organization. They are not my people. We are working on this together. And it helps bring that true ownership and true continuous improvement culture. Finally, this is a more businessy word, sorry about that. Blameless organizational self-reflection. I like really wordy things like this. Basically, it means looking at yourself critically without pointing fingers, right? So this didn't work well in a traditional post-mortem, right? A project fails. So what do? Well, this team says it's that team's fault. Oh, the ops team screwed up, or this team screwed up, or the API was busted, but our stuff is good. It's always about placing blame somewhere else. Instead, looking at everything that you do and being able to say, how do we do this together? And not trying to put blame, but instead say, how do we improve as an organization and learn? So around each of these, I'm going to talk about things we've done to make these happen at Avvo. Start off with transparency with clarity. For us, one of the big problems we had was that we had priorities, but nobody kind of knew what they were or why we had them. When you're a small company, let's say, and you have a single dev team, like 8 or 10 people, it's really easy for other teams, like everybody knows them. It's a small organization. Your n times n minus 1 divided by 2 is fairly small. So people know people. And so the head of marketing says, we need something for the website. I'm just going to go ask the developer to do this because they do it because we're friends. When you get into multiple teams, this starts to become a problem. No one's controlling the work. And also, each member of the senior leadership team has their own pet projects they want to drive, and nobody knows what's important, and it comes down to devs to try and make decisions about, wait, the CMO wants this, but the CTO wants this. Who am I supposed to do Whose project am I supposed to do? And meanwhile, the product manager is like, why are you doing either of those projects? I got stuff for you to do too. We created something called Wigs and Twigs. This is one of the programs we put in place. Wigs, for those of you who are students of the literature, actually stole this from Franklin Covey's 4 Disciplines of Execution. Great book, worth reading. So it comes from that. It's an acronym. It stands for Wildly Important Goals. For us, this is company-level strategy. This is the big stuff. And it's scoped that way. It's scoped to a year. We don't change these that often. If you can imagine your company and like the CEO was like every few weeks saying, this is the most important thing. No, wait, this is the most important thing. No, this. Right? You'll go nuts. It'll be difficult. So instead, we set that scope pretty big. We set it yearly, and we WIP limit it. Does anybody not know what WIP limiting is? Because I'm going to say it a few times. Okay, so good. WIP is another acronym, work in progress. The idea is that we're trying to limit the amount of work in progress so that we have good focus. If you try and do too many things, you don't get anything done. If you do fewer things, you get them all done. This has been a problem for us that you'll hear about, being good about our WIP limits. So from your wigs, this is the big strategic stuff. And you can use this in your teams too. This works very well at multiple levels. We get to SWIGs. If you knew the WIGs or WIG acronym, you probably have heard of PIG, which is pretty important goal. We don't like pigs. Well, we like pigs, but we don't like the pig word. So we created SWIGs, which are sub-WIGs. These are the more tactical things. So these are shorter term projects. By definition, they're cross-team. If a team can do it, it doesn't need to be on their own, doesn't need to be a SWIG. And their scope much smaller. We try and scope into 1 quarter. They sometimes run into 2. But these we review much more frequently, like every 6 weeks. So that gives us a lot more freedom to change these or reorder them. They're very strictly ordered, which is important. I can work on number 1 or number 4. Oh, I should work on number 1 because it is more important. So that communicates to the whole company what our biggest priorities are and what we're doing to achieve them. The next piece that we built was trying to build a data-driven mindset, getting objective about stuff. We were incredibly subjective about things while simultaneously pretending that we were a data-driven organization. Lots of companies like to talk about how data-driven they are, but very few actually are. It just means they look at their Google Analytics from time to time. So we wanted to really build that data-driven mindset. So we created something called DUBs. We like these. Well, actually, you can tell which ones are from me and which ones aren't. I like these goofy acronyms. DUBs is actually another acronym. It stands for Data Understanding Hypotheses, Bets, and then there's a silent R there called for results. There's a reason why we call them DUBs. If we're from, by the way, I forgot to say, I'm from Seattle. Our company's based in Seattle. You haven't heard of us because we're not doing business in Canada yet. But in Seattle, there's a very big university called UW, and that's why we chose understandings instead of another word that's not so weaselly. So DUBs also we stole and modified and remixed. And by the way, everything I'm telling you right now, steal, use it, change it, we do. Lots of good ideas in the world. Steal ours, use them however you want. You cannot beat our company in the legal marketplace space by doing DUBs. And if you can, then we don't deserve to win. So, our influences, one of the things we had at Spotify was this thing called Dibs. If you're really interested, you can, Henrik Nieberg wrote a blog post about Dibs. You can read. That in turn was influenced by the Toyota A3 problem-solving sheets and Kaizen cards. If folks know Kaizen, my Agile crew. Kaizen, we talk about Toyota production system. You hear, for some reason, if you hear that a lot, Toyota is a company that did some really innovative things around lean. If you know lean or lean startup, this all comes from Toyota. And they have this cool thing around a very structured way of solving problems. So the Spotify Dibs were kind of the main influence. but there were some changes I made because things I didn't like about the Spotify dibs. But I'll talk you through the process. It's actually very simple and very useful. Even if you don't use it in your company, using it personally, I've found to be incredibly good. So you start with your data. It's a data-driven decision-making process. Your data has to be facts. Can't be opinion. Has to be facts. It's incontrovertible. It is not up for debate. It's either fact or it isn't. And it can come from anywhere. It can be your internal product stuff. It can be stuff you know other companies do, stuff you read about, whatever. But you're collecting all the facts around a problem you have to solve or something you're trying to think about what to do, opportunity. From your facts, your data, comes your interpretation of your facts, your understanding of your data. It has to follow from the data. You can't say sky is blue, grass is green, therefore trees are yellow or something like that, because it doesn't follow from the facts. So it's semi-incontrovertible because the minute you start doing interpretation, okay, so there's some level of subjectivity, but it should directly follow your understanding of the facts. Now you come to like the actual, let's figure out what to do about it. Your hypothesis, your hypotheses sometimes. Based on our interpretation of the data, this is what we should do about it. Now this is where you get into subjectivity. When we review these as documents, this is where we start having the debate and the comments start to fly. Because, well, is this really what we should do based on this? From there come your bets. So the idea is that these are the things you're going to use to prove or disprove your hypothesis or hypotheses. You can run them sequentially, you can run them in parallel. This is the actual actions you're going to take. And either they're going to prove that your hypothesis was correct or they're going to disprove it. And that's the process you follow when you go through this. The thing we added, and this was never in dibs, amongst other things, is the result. So you ran your bets, what happened, right? This is really important because when you look at this, this is our actual template that Cassandra Copeland, who really drove the process at Avvo. This is the template she made in Confluence. This becomes a document. That's important. If you think about a company you've gone to or somebody joins your company and they say, we should really do this. I had this idea yesterday. We should do this. It'd be really cool. And somebody else says, yeah, we tried that like a year ago and it didn't work, so no, we're not going to do that. And then, oh, okay, and then they feel bad. Instead, when you can say, well, yeah, we did that, go look at the dub, and they can go, oh, this is why they did it, and this is the bets they made. And you know what? Actually, what I'm talking about is something different. And, oh, they missed this piece of data. Their hypotheses are wrong. Or, oh, I totally get it. I see why this doesn't make sense, and I'm cool because I now can see this. It becomes a documentation of all the decisions you're making in your company. And it's very valuable, especially for people joining. They get to understand why things have happened, but also it always comes from data. So people learn, I'm going to make a decision, I got to go get the data to validate my decision. Autonomy has been talked about a lot today. It's important. It's super important, especially if you're trying to build this continuous improvement culture, because without autonomy, you can't actually change anything yourself. You're just asking for somebody else to make a change for you. So this is important for this. In this way, we set up something called journey teams. One of the things I'll tell you, coming from Spotify, I was morally determined, I don't know if that's the right words, but I was really determined I'm not going to do Spotify at Avvo, coming to Avvo. Not because it's not a good format, but because when people ask me if they should do Spotify at their company, I always say no. Your company is in Swedes. If your company is in Stockholm, maybe. But it's very specific to that company. You can steal the ideas and change them. In the end, we ended up stealing a lot of those ideas and changing them. But the root reason was to create autonomous teams so that they could drive their own change. So our journey teams are focused around consumer journeys, customer journeys, either internal customers or external customers. We have Avvo is a legal marketplace. We help people get legal help, right? So if somebody has a problem, they need help for it. In the US, it's very often a legal problem, because most problems in the US tend to be legal problems. We help them get help for it, either on their own or with an attorney. So we have an attorney-facing team. We have 3 different customer or consumer-facing teams, and then we have 2 teams that are actually focused on the business, either supporting the developers or supporting the business. They're big enough that they can drive stuff on their own, and they're fully cross-functional. When I say fully cross-functional, I mean fully cross-functional. Dev, test, design, product, front-end, back-end, data engineering, data analytics, marketing if they need it, sales representation if they need it. Everything they need to do it on their own, which means that they also can control how they work. They're not dependent on other teams, and other teams aren't dependent on them. If you've ever been in an agile team in a non-agile organization, like you're doing your sprints and you're going great, and meanwhile you actually have date commitments because the team you're working with has a waterfall and they expect this API by this date to make their Gantt chart work out. It kind of breaks the whole thing. So we can have one team doing Kanban and one team doing Scrum, which we do. We have different teams doing different things, and it all works out because they don't have strict dependencies between each other. So one of the things that they have to be able to do to be autonomous and know how they're doing, again, being objective, is they each have a business goal, a business metric they uniquely drive. And that way they have their report card. Are we improving this or not? It's become now our primary, like this is where all the work happens. If you want to know where anything happens at Avvo that's like work, it's in journey teams at this point. That's where all the action is. And these are just some of the other goals. These are very similar. If you're building sort of a autonomous organization, this is good reasons why to do it. So all of this up to this point is getting ready. This is setting the conditions so good things happen. This isn't actually making those things happen. Wait a second. You cut my time? I got my own clock. My clock says something else. All right. Okay. Just good to know. Everything up to this point is just setting those conditions. It's tilling the soil. It's getting it ready. It's amending the soil. Now we're actually planting the seeds and starting to see the shoots come up. The RFC process. So RFC process is not something I invented, but the way I use it is, I think, unique, or at least unique to the organizations I've done. I created this at Spotify and then brought it to Avvo. One of the things that we do, and we have a few RFCs, and in fact, journey teams is a result of an RFC. That's how we do our organizational change, our big things, the things that actually affect people. So somebody in the organization identifies an issue, like 2 RFCs we have running right now. One is we're creating a career ladder, which we call Career Lattice, and the other one we're doing is changing how we do our interview process. And both of these are being run by RFC. And as I said, journey teams came out of an RFC. So somebody in the organization identifies an issue, like, hey, like, what does it look like to become a more senior person in this company? We haven't really made any decisions around that. We should figure that out. So they make a dub. This is a problem. Let's give a data-driven way of addressing it. Comes to tech leadership, me and my reports. We go, mostly what we're looking for is this really something we want to do right now? What else are we doing simultaneously? Like, let's manage our work in progress, our WIP. But if it looks like, yeah, this is a good idea, now's the time to do it, and we got headspace to do it in, yeah, let's do it. So then a cross-functional team, like cross-functional within the organization affected, usually technology, so it'll be somebody from test and somebody from development, somebody from data, wherever. We want to represent the organization as a whole. They actually they create a document. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to change. But because it's going to change the whole organization, we want everybody's input to it. So the next thing they do is they present it to the organization. They say, this is the thing we want to do differently than what we do today. Everybody can add their comments, add their questions, challenge, whatever, to the document. The team takes that, incorporates the feedback. iterates until like we reach rough consensus. Like you're never gonna get perfect consensus, but you get rough consensus. And then it becomes what we do now, the new thing, how we've changed. And by the way, this also becomes, this and the comments and questions, like doing a Google Docs is great, because you get to see all the comments. This becomes itself documentation. Why is this set up this way? Go look at the RFC, it's got all of it. You can see every argument about why we do this in this way. The folks who derived it get to own the rollout, which is kind of getting the cake at the end of the thing, and they get and long-term support for this. By the way, the mistake I've made in the past is not actually including, okay, what happens when we're done, and now this is how we do stuff. Long-term support has to be part of the RFC. So like at the end, who owns this? Do I own this? Does somebody in HR own this? Does somebody over here own it? Who's responsible, and how do we update it or change it over time? The last piece is actually the simplest in a lot of ways. I normally just call it retrospectives everywhere. But I really liked blameless organizational self-reflection. It's going to be the title of an album or something someday. The idea is simply this. If you do Agile, if you do Scrum, you have your end of your sprint retrospective. It's a look back over the sprint and go, how did this work? How can we do it better? That's great. That is where this continuous improvement hits an individual team. Where it doesn't tend to hit is past that. What does it look like if you say, oh, we had this RFC process. How did that go? How could we improve that next time? Or we had this speaker come to our company and give a talk. How did that go? Could we do it better next time? And just getting into the mindset of continually asking that question. So folks at Avvo got really tired of me after I started saying this question over and over again. When's the retrospective? Like, oh, that was great. Like, how this got done. When's the retrospective? I'd really like to understand what we did well here so that we can repeat it. Or, wow, that didn't really go so well, did it? It'd be good to understand why, so that we learn and we don't make the same mistakes twice. And if you do retrospectives for the positive things, yay, we did great. And the negative things, oh, that didn't go so well, let's not do that again. It doesn't become a punishment, right? It's not a post-mortem. It's just what we do at the end of a project. We look back at the project and learn from it. You ask the normal retrospective questions, but this one at the bottom is the important one. It's not just what have we learned about this specific thing? It's what does this thing tell us about how we do things as a company that we could improve? That's very, very important to understand it in that context. Because just like the dubs and the RFCs, this also becomes documentation. This tells you when you are lucky enough in your company to get chosen to do a project, to lead a project, oh, this is what has worked in other projects and this is what hasn't worked. So now I can not make those mistakes, I can make all brand new mistakes. That's awesome. And then I can add to that learning. So that's what we've been doing. And now your question is, that all sounds great, Kevin, but that sounds great when you talk about it, but how did it actually work? So one thing if you're doing any of this kind of stuff in your team or in your company, I want to point something out to you. This is a literal calendar, June 2016 to September 2017. So June 2016 is when I started Avvo from Spotify. And what you see here is a lot of stuff on the left-hand side and not a lot on the right-hand side. And there's a reason for it. If you think of the Greiner change curve, which most of you don't, but I tend to think about a lot for some reason, it's this idea that when you start any new kind of big project, especially if you're changing how you do something. Your first step is everyone's like, yay, we're changing something, this is awesome. And then it's like, oh, wait, I don't know how this works. And wow, this really used to work better before, and I hate this, and why did you make us do this? And then it's like, oh, wait, but now I kind of see it's working, and oh, you know what, this is actually better than before, and yay, this is the new normal. That's basically every change goes through that. One thing that's important, and we knew this in advance, but we still made the mistake. These add up. These are multiplicative. These aren't just like independent of each other. People actually have a change budget, and you can blow it, and we did. We just pushed too much change through the organization, and it kind of broke us a little bit for a little while. So we've taken a lot of time off this year on introducing new change and just getting used to the stuff we've got. But as I said, we've got 2 RFCs in process right now, one of which is going to actually take effect pretty soon. So we're kind of now on the other side. We're on that other side of the change curve where we're coming out the, you can't see this. Oh, wow, you really can't see this at all. We're coming out the top, and we're ready to take on some new change. One thing that's very, very important if you're doing any of this kind of work in your company is to keep this in mind. So to Wigs and Twigs. First iteration, this is a new thing for us. We picked 4 wigs, so this is June of last year. Too many, honestly. Senior leadership team wasn't ready to let go of all their pet projects. We picked, originally they wanted 15 swigs. I said that's never gonna work. How about 5? How about 10? How about 5? How about 7? Okay, fine. So we picked 7. I wanted them scoped to a month, and everybody wanted them scoped to 2 months because they didn't know how to do things small. We ended up completing 4, which is not so great. Teams were not happy about how it happened. Then comes this year. Now, instead of trying to do 4 wigs, we said, no, we're going to do 2. That seems more reasonable from what we've learned. It was. Instead of doing 7 swigs, we did 4. This time we did it a little bit different. The first time, part of the reason the swigs failed was because it was a senior leadership team. All their pet projects spewed into a list with no background, no context, transparency without clarity. This time we said, no, you tell us. We're telling you the wigs, you tell us what we should do. We tried to crowdsource the actual tactics. That was great. We got like 70 dubs around things we should do. Wasn't so great. We couldn't do 70 of those things, so we disappointed a lot of people. And we, in the end, though, we completed everything, but we didn't do it very well. It kind of burned the teams out. We took away their autonomy by putting too much work on them from outside. So now, current iteration, this is from June, we're only doing 2 swigs. This is probably too few. This time, SLT, the senior leadership team said, well, we kind of think these are the general tactics, the problems to solve, but you tell us how to solve these problems. And that's worked a lot better. More like we solicit specific dubs around tactics, which gives input from the organization, but not like blue sky kind of stuff. These are actually working really well, and teams we're not kind of overwhelming the teams. So this is now good. I think we kind of overcorrected. We'll maybe end up coming a little bit back, but at least it's working and people are happy. The dubs themselves actually turned out to be surprisingly successful. A lot of that credit has to go to the person I mentioned before, Cassandra. She was responsible for the rollout of this, and she just trained everybody. The whole company got trained in them. We have generated 160 plus of these things. There's 2 or 3 added a week. Again, the benefit of these being in Confluence, you'll see they're all tagged with the dub. I subscribe to it. I can see them all coming in. This one, no frowny face. It just worked out surprisingly well. True credit to somebody who knows how to run a project. Journey teams, started bad, partially because we were blowing out our change budget. We also had a problem before. We had a lot of little teams. Now we have fewer bigger teams. There was a lot of stuff that fell between the chairs, as I like to say, like systems that were in production and no one owned because the team's focuses were really small. One of the rules I had around creating the journey teams is everything had to be owned somewhere, which meant all these teams now had way more stuff than they were used to, and they all took a little while to figure out what that meant. And so it was kind of slow going. But now actually they're they're all working fairly well. So, summing up, with clear priorities, metrics-driven, autonomous teams, data-driven decision-making, organizational ownership of organizational change, a practice of retrospectives, an archive of their learnings, now we're really talking about a true garden that is continuing to grow and be beautiful and make people happy and feel ownership of what they do and the ability to change it. So I don't know how much time I actually have, or even if I'm over at the moment. If you have questions and you can't ask them to me today, or you don't want to, you can, and think of them later, you can tweet me here. And this is, I've given this talk a couple times, but I always want to improve, continuously improve myself. So if this is a very short feedback form, if you'd like to give me feedback. Thank you.
Sweet. Loved it.